The woman on the train from Clausthal to Goslar told me she gathers resin, tree resin from the pines. She was thin, tough as leather, with hands that were golden from resin that had seeped into the skin over decades, indelible as tattoos, but natural. The autumn glowed red and orange outside, and she gazed out at the mountains like old friends, not with longing, but with familiarity. She knew them all by name, these hills and forests. The train rolled slowly through air that already carried a hint of cold, and she breathed in as if searching for something special in that scent.
40 years since I started gathering resin, she said. I was a girl, perhaps 18, and my father showed me how to read the tree. The pine, it's a clever tree. It doesn't hide its resin. It gives it freely when it's time. You just have to recognize the right sign, find the right place. My father, he showed me how to touch the bark, not testing, but accepting, the way you'd touch a horse's shoulder. The tree must know you're not afraid, he said. If you're frightened, the tree will feel it, and it will hold back its resin. But if you trust completely, then the tree opens itself to you like a woman who are beloved. That's what I learned. Trust is the first language of resin. She told me of the work that's a lifetime, going out into the forest every autumn when the temperature is right, when the resin begins to flow. With a small knife cutting a tiny groove into the bark and then waiting. The resin drips slowly like blood from a wound, but that's not blood, it's the tree's life. The tree, she said, it understands. The tree knows why I come. The tree knows I don't take its resin for money. I take it because I love it, because it smells beautiful, because it's light in the darkness, amber light, like sunlight that's sunk into the earth. She showed me small jars full of resin, different colors, different scents. This is from this year, from this forest, from this tree. This is from last year. See how darker it is? That's what time looks like. That's how life ages. She smelled each one, and her face became soft, grateful, present. She opened a small leather bag from her rucksack. The leather was dark brown, smooth from decades of use. Inside were tiny tools, each one a work of art. A knife with a handle of deer bone, a scraper with silver flecks, a small bottle of oil to protect the tools. My father gave me this knife when I was 15, she whispered, and it was like a canonization. It has tended 1,000 trees, and it will tend 1,000 more after me, if my grandchildren want it. If not, it will die with me. The knowledge will die too. She held the knife into the sunlight streaming through the window, and the blade glowed golden. 3 days ago, she said, I went out to my favorite place up near Clausthal. There's a pine there, a very old pine, perhaps 200 years old. I've known it since I was young. Her bark is like the skin of an old woman, wrinkled, dark, alive. And the resin she gives is the finest resin in the whole forest, yellow as amber, smelling like lemon and forest together. I put my knife to her, and as I cut, I suddenly realized we're breathing together, the pine and I. We have the same rhythm. We're one system, you see, not human and tree, just tree and human, like one word. Her eyes became glassy, not from tears, but from something greater. The gathering isn't just work for me. It's prayer, it's worship. Every time I go to a tree, I ask it, may I? And the tree answers. Sometimes it says no, and then I move on. But when it says yes, and you feel that here, she tapped her chest, then the gathering becomes something sacred, something that transcends time. I'm the last in my family doing this, she said. My children don't want to. They say, Mother, it's madness. There's no money in it, no future. But I tell them, this is the future. This is the only future.
If I don't gather the resin, who will? If nobody does, then the world forgets how it smells, how it lives. She leaned her head back against the seat and suddenly seemed very old. Not physically, but temporally, as if all the decades were being loaded onto her like weight. I'm 79 now. My hands, they ache. In winter, the fingers are stiff. I can't work as long in the cold as I used to. But the trees don't wait for my health. In autumn, when the resin comes, I have to go. It's not madness, it's duty. It's like the love for a child. You can't say, "Oh, I'm too tired today." She brought out another jar, this one particularly dark, almost black. This is from 10 years ago. I kept it because the tree was very ill then. The resin, it was dark, almost like sorrow. I thought the tree would die, but it didn't. I went back every year, and every year the resin got lighter, more alive. And now the tree is healthier than ever. The gathering, the cutting gently, the respect, it helped the tree heal. That's what I've learned in my life, that real love doesn't just take, it also gives. The train passed pine forests, dark green, deep, ancient. She placed her hand against the window as if blessing the tree. "My life is simple," she said. "The forest, the resin, the seasons. But it's whole. It's, how should I put it? It's true. Not mixed with lies or haste or greed. Just tree, resin, human, love." And then, as if realizing she's talked too much, she looked at me, directly, calmly, with full presence. "You'll fall asleep soon, yes? That's good. You must sleep. The train, it's like a lullaby, isn't it? Back and forth, like the resin dripping from the tree. Drop, 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 slowly, regularly, like a heartbeat. The train is the same. It travels and you grow tired, and that's natural." She took the dark jar with the old resin and opened it very carefully. The scent rose up, not sharp, but warm, enveloping, like a dream you're having. She held the jar toward me. "Smell it. That's strength. That's time. That's 1,000 years of tree boiled down to this small form. And now you smell it. You're part of this time." She fell asleep, her head resting against the window. And I thought of the forests of the upper Harz, the pines, the scent of resin that's eternal, older than humans, that will survive when we all sleep. The train went on, but the forest remained, waiting for the next woman who knows the right time, who sets the knife correctly, who understands the secret of the trees. And I thought of the decades she has given, not for fame, not for recognition, but because the trees needed her, because love allowed no other choice. And slowly, as the train travels through the night, I drifted away with the scent of resin into the depth of the forest, where the pine breathes, where time flows like resin, slowly, golden, eternal, and everything is color, scent, love. The light appeared, quite suddenly, almost imperceptibly, after a long time in the darkness. I'm traveling on the line from Andermatt to Disentis, the route through the Alps, where the mountains are so high that trains must pass through them. The train had been in a tunnel for a long time, a great alpine tunnel, kilometers long, perhaps 10 kilometers, perhaps 15, I don't know. It was completely dark, black, not gray, not dark blue, black. The kind of darkness that makes the eye forget that light exists, that colors exist, that life exists. The kind of darkness that devours time. The kind of darkness where you start to believe things you shouldn't believe. And then, suddenly, without warning, the light. The light was small at first. A point at the end of the tunnel, the size of a star, small as a pinprick. But it wasn't a star. It was the sun, the first sun in a long, long time. The light grew larger as the train had to continue, as the darkness raced past. The tunnel seemed endless, the wall endlessly dark, but the light grew bigger and bigger, unstoppable. From a star to a circle, from a circle to a large oval, from oval to an opening, and then we were outside, in the sun, in the world. And I remember thinking, that could have been a metaphor, couldn't it? That could have been a moment of redemption, a moment where I understand that life has hope. But it was more than that. It was real. The sun was real, the light was real, and I was real, and I breathe, and I live, and the darkness is past. The light was blinding. For a moment I couldn't see. The sun was so bright that my eyes hurt. But then my eyes grew accustomed, and I saw the world. I saw the mountains, I saw the meadows, I saw the sky. I saw reality after so long in the darkness. It was like having had a long dream and you've just woken up, and my heart beat faster. Not from fear, from relief, from joy, from the feeling that I'm still alive, that I'm still here, that the darkness hasn't taken me. I thought, as I looked out at the mountains, about how this moment is like life, all of life. Sometimes you're in a tunnel. You don't see the sun. You don't see the colors, all the green mountains, all the flowers, all the life. You don't really see where you're going, not clearly. You just go. You just travel. You hope there's a light. You're not sure if there's a light. And then the light appears quite suddenly, and everything changes. Everything becomes possible. Everything becomes beautiful. The world is beautiful again. And you're alive again. The tunnel is a metaphor. Darkness, difficulty, despair, sadness, loss. All the things that destroy us, that make us small, that make us believe there's no meaning. But the light is also a metaphor. Hope, redemption, truth, love. All the things that save us, that make us big, that make us believe everything's possible. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel, always. It can take a long time. It can hurt when you come out because the eyes aren't accustomed to the brightness. But it's there. It waits for you. The light always waits. For all of us. For you. And as I say this, as I speak these words, I know this isn't just a story. This is a truth, a deep truth. A truth that lies in nature, in the mountains, in the tunnels, in the trains, in the people who travel and hope and dream. There's always a light. Always. The train travels on. We're out of the tunnel. We travel through the mountains, but now the sun is with us. Now the darkness is behind us. I see the goats on the slopes. I see the flowers. I see the life. I see that there's a world outside this train, outside my thoughts, a real world, a real life, a real hope. And I'm grateful, so grateful that I survived this tunnel, that I can still see the light, that I can still travel, can still journey, can still dream, that I'm still alive. And I think of all the people who've ever traveled through a tunnel. All the travelers who sat in the darkness, who hoped there was light. All the workers who dug these tunnels, who worked in the earth to give others the possibility of crossing the mountain. Without these tunnels, I wouldn't be here. I couldn't travel. I wouldn't see the light on the other side. And I'm connected with all these people who created something so others could go forward. That's a form of love that's not often recognized, but it's a deep love. Perhaps the deepest love, the love that sacrifices so others can be free. The train comes to Disentis. The lights of the village appear. The tunnel is completely behind me now. It's only a memory. The darkness is gone. The light remains. And I'm grateful. Grateful that the tunnel didn't last forever. Grateful that there was a light. Grateful that I didn't stay in the darkness. Grateful that I had this moment, the light, the experience of hope, the understanding that everything is finite, that even the longest tunnel has an end. And I know there will be other tunnels. There are always other tunnels. Life isn't one tunnel. Life is hundreds of tunnels, one after another. Sometimes the tunnels are short, sometimes they're long. Sometimes we think they never end. And sometimes, in the tunnels, we forget that there's a light. We think the darkness is eternal. We think the pain will never end. But it does. The pain ends, the darkness ends, and the light always comes again. I've learned that, not through words, but through experience, through hundreds of tunnels, through hundreds of lights, through hundreds of moments when I thought it was the end, and it wasn't the end. It was just a tunnel, and the light was on the other side, waiting for me. And if you're in a tunnel, if you're sitting in the darkness now, I'm telling you, hold on. The train moves. The light comes. It's not far away. It's there. At the end of the tunnel, where it always is, waiting for you. Believe me. And when I sleep now, when I close my eyes, I can still see the light from this tunnel, the light that saved me, the light that showed me there's still hope, that there's still life, and I'm still traveling, still in this train, still through the Alps, still heading towards Disentis. And every time I enter a new tunnel, every time the darkness surrounds me, I remember this moment, the light, and I know that I'll see it again, at the end, where hope waits, where life waits, where everything that matters waits. Ta-dum, ta-dum, slowly, gently, into sleep, into light, always home. It was the blanket that saved me. I'm traveling on the line from Kempten to Oberstdorf on a winter evening when the world outside was completely frozen. All white, all ice. Minus 20 degrees, perhaps even colder, perhaps minus 25. The train wasn't very warm. The heating was old and it was working hard, but simply wasn't good enough. The windows were painfully cold to touch. The air in the compartment was cold. I could see my breath. Everything was cold. Everything was against me. But under my blanket was a different world. The blanket was dark blue, very dark blue, like the sky just before a snowstorm. It was heavy, unusually heavy, as though it contained lead. It was old, very old, probably 20, 30 years old. It smelled of railways, of grease, of travel, of 100 years of passengers, of 100 years of suffering and hope. It was the most beautiful blanket I'd ever felt. Under it, I couldn't hear the cold. The windows could be ice cold, but I didn't feel it. Under it was only darkness and warmth, only me, only my thoughts, only the speed of the train, only the gentle rattle of the wheels beneath me, only the illusion of safety. But wait, perhaps it was no illusion. Perhaps it was real. Perhaps safety is always a kind of will, an act of acceptance, a choice you make with your whole body. I thought of all the people who had slept under this blanket, all the travelers, all the workers, all the lovers, all the lonely ones, all those who traveled through these mountains, the same route, the same darkness, the same blanket. And all of them had found, as I find now, that under this blanket, everything was safe, everything was possible, everything was beautiful. And I wondered, if I lifted the blanket, would I see their faces? Would I see the tears that were shed under it? Would I see the joy that was shared under it? The blanket was a witness, evidence that people, that all of us, have the need to hide, to protect ourselves, to love. Under a blanket in the night, on a moving train, between two places, between two lives. The warmth wasn't really from the heating. It was from my body. I was the one who created the warmth. I was the one who created under this blanket a space of warmth. A small universe just for me. A shield against the world. A cocoon I didn't want to leave. The blanket was like an embrace. The warmth was like love. And I thought, isn't that the secret? That we create our own warmth. That safety doesn't come from outside, but from within. The blanket is only the symbol, the container. But the real warmth, that comes from me, from my heart, from my ability to hold myself, to love myself, to comfort myself. I pulled the blanket higher. I pulled it up to my chin. I pulled it up to my eyes. And then I was completely protected. The train could travel, the mountains could pass by, the stars could shine, the moon could rise and set. But under my blanket, I was safe. I was at home. I had arrived. And the cold outside, that was nothing, a dream, a thought. Under this blanket, there was only warmth, only light, only life. I remember the first time I traveled on this train as a young man. It was winter, as always. The heating didn't work well, that hasn't changed, and the blanket lay on the seat, old and tattered. And I picked it up, and I pulled it over me. And in that moment, in that one instant, I felt something strange. I felt that I wasn't alone. That all the other people who'd ever used this blanket were with me. Their body heat, their tears, their dreams, everything had soaked into this blanket. And I was connected with them, with hundreds of people I would never meet, but who warmed me nonetheless. That's a kind of love most people never understand, but I understood it. In that moment, under this blanket, I understood. And that's the mystery of a heavy blanket on a cold train. It's not just cloth and wool. It's community. It's history. It's a silent witness to all the suffering and all the joy of the people who carried it. And when I drape it over myself today, I'm not alone. I'm connected with all these people. And when the blanket one day is no longer there, when it's simply replaced by a new, sterile blanket, then something important will be lost. Not a blanket, but a continuity, a line from person to person, a chain of love that stretches across decades. That's what's most valuable about this blanket, not its warmth, but what it connects. That is the deep inner wonder of a heavy blanket on a train in the night. The warmth isn't simply physical, isn't simply a matter of degrees Celsius. It's also mental. It's also emotional. It's also spiritual. A blanket can mean much to a person. A blanket can save your life when everything else fails. A blanket can give you hope when everything is hopeless. A blanket can let you know that the world isn't so bad, that there are still good things, that there are still beautiful things, that there are still places that are warm, that there are still people who love you. All of that a blanket says when you lie under it on a winter night on a cold train between two mountain cities. And you know, I've traveled with this blanket 100 times now. I've climbed onto this train 100 times, and I've looked for it. And every time, it has waited for me. It's grown older, more worn, but it's still there. It silently does its job. It warms, it protects, it loves in its quiet, simple way. And I wonder, will people understand that? Will people ever understand that the greatest love is sometimes an old blanket lying on a cold train, waiting to warm someone who is cold? It's not glamorous, it's not new, it's not beautiful, but it's faithful. And faithfulness is the deepest form of love. The train travels on through the mountains. The lights of Oberstdorf appear on the horizon. The blanket grows warmer as we approach, though that's impossible. Or perhaps I've only fallen deeper into sleep. Perhaps I've begun to dream. Perhaps I'm no longer on the train. Perhaps I'm at home, under a different blanket, in a different bed, with the people I love. And if this is a dream, I never want to wake up, want to stay under this blanket forever, warm, safe, at home. In this train that is no longer a train, but a temple of warmth, a sanctuary of love, a place where time stands still and the blanket, my old faithful blanket, carries me gently into sleep. And when I stand at the end of my life, when the last journey is over, when I will take no more trains, I won't regret this blanket. I'll think of it with a smile, of the 100 times it warmed me, of the 100 times it showed me that love is simple, that love can be a blanket, that love can be anything, if only you know how to see it. I met the priest on the line between Suceava and Iași on an autumn evening when the leaves hung like fire in the trees and the air had grown cold. He sat across from me, and the first thing I noticed was his beard, long, dark, with gray running through it like a forest you couldn't cross. His eyes were very large and very old, and he wore black clothes, and around his neck hung a wooden crucifix, darkened and polished by many years. I tried at first not to disturb him. You learn to sense this when you travel on trains for long, when a person needs quiet and when they're ready to speak. But this priest had a manner that was inviting, even though he said nothing. His bearing was open, like someone who spent a long time learning to listen to others. So I finally asked him where he was going, and his voice, when he answered, was quiet but very clear, like water flowing over stones. "I'm going home," he said. "After many years, I'm finally going home." His village wasn't large, he explained, and the church was small, and the congregation had grown older, like all congregations in that region. But the church needed a priest, and he'd been in the city for many years, in a large cathedral with hundreds of believers, where every liturgy was like a great concert, with choirs and incense rising to the high vaults. But his heart had always longed for something else. "For something else?" I asked. And he leaned forward slightly, and his eyes grew even brighter, as if they had an inner light, and he said, "For silence. For a silence so deep you can hear God in it." In the great cathedral, he said, there was faith, but there was also splendor, and splendor can obscure faith if you're not careful. But in a small village, in a small church, there's only the truth of prayer, the truth of people who come to pray because they believe, not because it's customary.
He told me about his childhood in that village. His mother had taken him to church, and he could still remember how the priest, then a very old man with a white beard, sprinkled holy water on the forehead of believers, and how every child, himself included, began to dream that water could be holy, that words could be holy, that the place itself was holy. And that dream had never left him. It's not like other professions, where you wake up and think you'd rather be something else. With the priesthood, it's different. You can't wake up and want to forget it. It's always there, even in the hardest moments. The night was now completely black outside, but we sat in the warm light of the train, and this priest spoke with a quietness that made me increasingly sleepy. He described the village as it looked in autumn. The harvest had just finished, and everywhere lay maize kernels and straw on the roads. The people there all knew each other, generations of families marrying and dying and bearing new generations. And the church was the center, the place where these great moments of life, birth, marriage, death, gained their meaning. I saw in my mind's eye the streets of the village, paved or unpaved, with houses 100 years old, perhaps older. The church would stand on a small hill. That was always the way in these villages, so you could see it from everywhere. So the cross at the top stood against the sky. And the bell, he said. The bell rang every morning and every evening, and the people arranged their days around this ringing. The bell told them when to wake, when to go to church, when the day had ended. It was like an old heartbeat of the village. But it's not easy, he said then. And this was the first time I heard doubt in his voice. It's very hard to be a priest in a small village. There's much suffering. And you can't heal everyone, not with words, not with prayers. Sometimes you can only be there and listen. An old widow comes, and her son has gone to work in the city, and she sees him twice a year when he visits. What can the priest give her? Only his presence. Only the fact that someone is there and listening, that her sadness matters, that her life matters. And I understood that he wasn't talking about comfort, not about simple answers, but about the depth of listening. That's different. Listening is a form of love when you do it properly. You don't listen with your ears alone, but with your heart, with your whole body, with your mind. You take on what the other person tells you, and you carry it with you. That's difficult. That's very, very difficult. But that's what priests should do, said this man with the dark beard. And that's why he'd been in the city for years and had to return home now. And is that enough? I asked. And he thought for a long time before answering. Then he said quietly, "Yes, it's enough. It's not enough for everything, but for what a priest can give, it's enough. We can't heal, but we can bear witness. We can listen. We can speak the truth. That life is hard and painful, but that it also has meaning, that there's also beauty if you look long enough." The priest leaned back and looked out the dark window into the autumn night. Somewhere out there rivers flow, I thought. Rivers that have flowed for 100 years, and people living and dying in this light and darkness. And this priest wanted to return, to be part of this life, not as someone who has answers, but as someone ready to carry the questions alongside his congregation. That was grace, or so it seemed to me. He showed me a photograph of his church, a small wooden structure, very old, with a cross-shaped roof, the cross made of wood, not stone. It was the simplest church I'd ever seen, but there was something in it that was very powerful. The walls were painted dark red, and the windows were small, and there the sun would shine slowly through the old glass panes. And I suddenly understood why this man had spent all those years in the city, what he'd been missing, why he had to go home now. It wasn't because the village was better, but because it was more true.
There were no distractions there, only the people and their faith and the old wooden walls of a church that carried prayers from 100 years within it, the sighs and hopes of people long dead. The train travels on southward, and soon it will arrive at Iași, and this priest will get out and travel to his village, perhaps by bus, perhaps on foot, and then he'll be there, in the church where he belongs. And I still sit on the train, and his words swim in my head, soothe me, carry me slowly away, slowly, like a prayer you haven't heard in a long time, but one you've never forgotten. The rhythm of the wheels grows slower in my awareness, or perhaps we're truly slowing because the night grows deeper and the world outside sleeps. My eyes grow heavy, and I still see the dark beard before my eyes, the simple wooden cross, the dark light of a small church in the evening, and the silence this priest sought, the silence I now find in this warm compartment, in this dark night, on the line between the mountains and the plains of Romania, slowly, warmly, falling asleep. The rattle of the wheels has a special rhythm tonight. Clack, 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 clack. And suddenly, this steady beat brings back to me the sound of an old sewing machine I heard long ago. The train between Lviv and Ternopil passes through the dark Galician landscape, and somehow the memory of that seamstress comes to mind, though it was long ago. A woman whose hands could make anything. She always sat in a small room, the window facing the street, and her feet drove the machine forward. The cloth under her hands flowed like water, silk, linen, heavy woolens, materials thin as veils. She could handle anything. Her spectacles were pushed up onto her forehead, even though she worked close to the material, and her eyes were gray and calm, as if they'd already seen everything the world had to offer in colors and patterns. She wasn't old when I knew her, but her calm made her seem older, as if she'd been on this earth for a very long time. The room itself was small, but it didn't feel cramped. The walls were whitewashed, and everywhere fabrics hung on wooden rods, samples, hues, textures she'd gathered over the years. A green wool beside a delicate pink silk, then a dark blue, almost black, then something bright again. She arranged them by nothing visible, but when you asked which fabric suited which dress, she'd point instantly to the right one, as if she could feel the colors, not just see them. The floor was wooden, worn by years, and the light fell through the window directly onto the work surface where the sewing machine stood, a black machine with gold decorations, probably 40 years old. The rhythm of that machine, you understand, was like the breathing of the city itself. In the mornings, she'd start at 8 and run almost without stopping until evening. You could find the shop by following the sound, that clack, 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 clack echoing through the streets of Lviv. She worked for everyone. Brides whose wedding dresses took months to shape under her hands, merchants who needed black suits, mothers who wanted children's clothes mended. Every piece was perfect, not rushed, but completed with a kind of quiet love and unshakable patience. That was her secret. I go into her room sometimes just to watch her work. She didn't speak much, but when she lifted her head, when she tied a knot or set a complicated sleeve, you understood everything. Her eyes showed you how the needle should pierce the cloth, how to hold the tension, how not to hurry perfection. Once I helped her lay out a particularly difficult fabric, so thin you could see through it, and she said only, very quietly, that good work is like good listening. It's about understanding what the cloth wants to tell you, not what you want to command it to do. The room always smelled of hot metal from the machine and the iron, and there was a faint, warm scent of fabric, of linen and threads that had been in the sun. In winter, candles heated the small workshop, and in summer she'd open the window and you'd see her sitting there, the light falling directly on her work, her hands relentlessly precise, She took time with every stitch. Not from slowness, no, but from respect. Respect for the material, for the task, for the person who would wear the finished dress. Once I sat many hours in that room, watching her sew a wedding dress. The girl who was to wear it had long since left, but the seamstress worked as though the bride were still there, as if she could feel every stitch. She worked on pearls that had to be sewn in a very particular curve, and her eyes narrowed, and her right hand moved with a certainty that only love could explain. The thread was thinner than a human hair, and she knotted it firmly, drew it tight, made the knots disappear into the fabric, hour after hour. The machine hummed under her feet, clack, 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 and I heard the rhythm until it was impossible to resist, and my own head began to sway with this music. I sat in the background, warm in my chair, and felt how this rhythm made me weaker and weaker, quieter. The world outside the window disappeared. There was only this sound, this rhythm, this moment of perfection. Sometimes she'd come to the station just to watch the train. That surprised me the first time. She'd simply stand there, look at the locomotive, the brass fittings gleaming, the great wheels turning slowly. I asked her why. She said, I can still see her saying it, that she liked how a machine was built. All the parts knew what they had to do. Each part fitted with the others. It was like a sewing workshop made of metal and fire, and it needed love in the building, just like a good dress. She showed me then the details only she saw. The hinge on the wheel, how it worked with oily smoothness. The way the brass decorations weren't accidental, but showed that someone had spent time building this locomotive, as if some unknown craftsman, some mechanic, had woven his heart into the metal. She pointed to these things as if they understood her old sewing machine, as if they were sisters in the matter of quality. And suddenly I understood that this old seamstress didn't just make clothes. She saw everywhere the traces of craftsmanship, of care, of the human desire to do something properly, not cheaply, not hastily, but properly. That sewing machine's rattle, the rhythm I hear now, takes me back to the warm, small room in Lviv, to the eyes of a woman who knew that quality is not negotiable, that patience is not weakness, but a form of power. Her fingers moved in a dance that only experience can teach. Clack, 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 clack. Not fast, not slow. Right. There's a kind of peace that comes from this certainty. You understand? Peace that comes from knowing what you do and doing it perfectly. This seamstress had that peace in her eyes. She didn't try to change the world. She didn't try to become rich. She worked in her small room in Lviv, sewing dresses, and knew that every dress her hands completed brought a piece of beauty into the world. That was enough. That was everything. And this machine, this rhythm echoing in the air of a train between Lviv and Ternopil, reminds me that the best work is invisible, not because it's hidden, but because it's so perfect you can't see it anymore. You only feel it, in the way a dress fits, how it feels, how beautifully it flatters. That's all this old seamstress wanted. The train travels on into the night, and I lean my head against the window, but I don't see the darkness out there. I still see that small room with the sewing machine, and I see her hands, how they work, and I see the contentment in her face, the contentment of someone who knows she's doing something right, that she's creating something that lives longer than she will. Her needle drew lines in the fabric that don't fade, that don't break, and my eyes grow heavy at this thought. The rhythm, clack, 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 grows slower. Or perhaps I'm only closing my eyes and hearing it now like an echo from another time, from Lviv. from that small room where a woman with grey eyes wove the world into silk and linen. But that was long ago. The train travels on, and the night grows warmer, and I sink slowly, slowly into sleep. I met the bridge builder on a train along the Rhine, on the route from Koblenz to Mainz. That's one of the most beautiful train routes I know. The Rhine on one side, broad and calm and silver. The vineyards on the other, steep and green. And between them, the castles, one after another, sitting on the rocks like stone eagles. The train ran so close to the water that you could see the waves left by the ships. Long, gentle waves that lapped at the shore and retreated again, like a breath that comes and goes. He was a large, quiet man in his early 80s, with hands so big and so solid they looked as though you could build bridges from them. His face was angular, with deep wrinkles round his eyes that looked like lines on a map. And his gaze was both firm and warm, the gaze of someone used to surveying great distances, seeing both banks at once. He wore an old coat, dark blue, and on his wrist a watch that had stopped, which he'd never repaired, because it had stopped at exactly the minute his last bridge was completed. He watched the Rhine with the attention of someone who sees rivers differently from others. Not as landscape, not as backdrop, but as obstacle, as challenge, as partner. 45 years, he said, without taking his eyes from the water. 45 years I've built bridges, over rivers, over gorges, over motorways. 23 bridges altogether, each different, each special, each a child in a way. He told me about his first bridge, a small footbridge over a stream in Franconia, he said. 8 meters span, nothing special technically, but for me, it was the whole world. I stood on the bank and looked at the other side, and between was nothing. Just water, just emptiness. And then, after months of planning and building, suddenly there was something. An arch, a path, a connection between here and there. And the first person to cross it was an old couple holding hands. And in that moment, he said, in that moment, I knew what my life would be. Not steel and concrete, not calculations and plans, but connections, ways between people. He told me about his greatest bridge, a cable-stayed bridge over a valley in the Black Forest, 240 meters long, 70 meters high. 3 years the construction took, he said. 3 years, during which I came to the site every morning and watched the pillars grow into the sky, meter by meter, like concrete trees. And the cables, he said, the cables are the most beautiful thing about a cable-stayed bridge. They span from the pylons to the roadway like the strings of a harp. And when the wind passes through, then the bridge sings. A deep, quiet humming that you feel more than hear. Every bridge has its own tone, you see, its own sound, like a bell, like an instrument. I asked if he was afraid. With the big bridges, the high ones, the bridges over deep gorges, and he shook his head and said, "Not afraid. Respect. Respect for the forces you must master. For gravity, which pulls everything down. For the wind, which pushes everything to the side. For time, which rusts everything and makes it weary. A bridge is a promise, he said, a promise to all who cross it. I hold you, I carry you, I bring you safely to the other side. And you must keep that promise for 100 years, 200, longer. A bridge must never break its promise. Never. I asked what bridge building had taught him, and he looked out the window at the Rhine, where a long freight barge was slowly drifting downstream, laden with coal or ore, and on its deck stood a man smoking and gazing into the distance. Connections are everything, he said. That's what I've learned. Not just bridges of steel, connections between people, between ideas, between what is and what might be. Every conversation is a bridge, every gesture of kindness, every glance that says, I see you, I hear you, I'm on your side. We're all islands, he said. Each of us stands on our own shore, and all we can do is build bridges to each other, for each other, arch by arch, stone by stone, and every bridge that holds is a small miracle. He got off at Mainz, buttoned his coat, and walked across the platform with the broad, confident steps of a man used to standing on structures he himself had built. And I gazed at the Rhine for a while, at the bridges we'd crossed, imagining how each one was a promise someone had made, and that had been kept. Connections are everything. I think of that when I'm tired and feel alone. Then I remember the bridge builder, his great hands, the bridge that sings in the wind, the old couple holding hands as they crossed his bridge for the first time. The train carries on, over bridges and through tunnels and through the night, and the rattle is like a promise. I carry you, I hold you, I bring you safely to the other side of night. Ta-dum, ta-dum, and my eyes grow heavy, and I let myself be carried over the river of hours, over the valley of silence, safe, held, connected. The man on the train from Stendal to Salzwedel told me he was a hunter, but not anymore. I'm a hunter without a gun, he said, with a smile that was full of history and also full of sorrow, full of understanding. I gave away my gun 15 years ago, but the hunting, that remains. You can't simply give that away. It's like a color that's seeped into your skin. You can't wash the color away, no matter how long you try. He was old, perhaps 70, with eyes that looked like a hunter's, searching, watchful, waiting, but also quiet, content with what he saw. His hands were large, scarred, the hands of someone who's worked hard his whole life. But it wasn't the hardness of cruelty, it was the hardness of nature, of seasons, of life itself. I went into the forest to hunt, for meat, for life, for tradition, because my father hunted that way and his father before him. That's what a hunter does. It's in the family, you see? It's like original sin, but not bad, just it's how you're born. It's how you become a man in my family, with a gun, with blood, with pride in the hunt. But then he stopped and his face became thoughtful. Then one day a stag, a big, beautiful stag with horns like the branches of an old tree. I had him in my rifle, my finger was on the trigger, and I stood there.
I looked into his eyes, and I really saw,
that this stag was not simply an animal. He was a life, a full, conscious, precious life, just like my own. His eyes were not empty, as I'd always thought. They were full of intelligence, of memories, of dreams for the future. The stag knew I could kill him. He knew my finger was on the trigger, and yet there was no fear in his eyes. There was only peace. There was only acceptance. And in that moment, I understood that I had no right to shoot, that no hunter has the right. That's what I learned, perhaps too late, but not too late to turn back. I lowered the gun slowly, and the stag, he looked at me, not with fear, but with understanding, with a nod, you might say. And then he went, slowly, with dignity, into the deep forest. And I stood there with my empty gun, and I wept. I wept because I had seen life, really seen it for the first time. And also, I wept because I understood in that moment all the other stags, all the animals I'd killed in my life. Their eyes, their intelligence, their dignity. All of it, I'd ignored it for decades.
"Since that day," he said, "I've still gone into the forest, but I've gone to see, not to shoot, to observe, to listen, to understand. And that is much more intense than hunting. That is much more alive. The hunter without a gun, he sees more than the hunter with a gun. He hears more, he loves more. I've learned that the most beautiful moments are not when you shoot, but when you sit very still and you see how life happens, how it really is, without your interference, without your violence." He leaned his head back and his eyes became distant, nostalgic. I went into the forest and I opened my book, the book of nature. And what I read, it was like poetry, like a religion, like everything that's sacred. The forest, it had always been trying to tell me, but I was too busy with my gun to hear. "My family," he said, "they don't understand. They say, you're a hunter, that's who you are, don't give it up. But I say, I'm still a hunter, perhaps a different kind of hunter. I hunt pictures now, I hunt sounds, I hunt moments when nature shows me its truth. It's a harder hunt because you can never really catch what you're hunting. But that's also what's beautiful about it. The old hunt, you shoot, you hit or you miss, and then it's over. But this new hunt, it never ends. The stag is still there, the owl is still there. The love between them, that remains. And me? I'm happier now, with empty hands and a full heart, than I ever was with a full rucksack and an empty soul." The train traveled through the flat land of Saxony-Anhalt, and the man looked out, searching, like a hunter. "I'm glad," he said, "that I gave away the gun. It was hard, but it was right. Because now, when I die, and that will be soon, I can feel it. I can say, I did not kill a stag. I did not take a life. I only loved. And that is enough. More than enough." He opened an old leather bag and took something out. Not a gun, not ammunition, but an old hunting journal. The pages were yellowed, full of notes in different colors with dates and places. "This is my hunting log," he said. "Each page is a stag, a doe, an animal I killed. How many are there? 200? 300? I don't know anymore. I stopped counting because counting drove me mad. But since I gave away the gun, I still write in this book. But not the animals I killed, but the animals I saw, the animals I loved,
the animals I protected. And the pages are now filled with life, not with death, with gratitude, not with guilt. He showed me his mobile phone, which surprised me that such an old man carries such a thing. But he showed me photographs, hundreds of photographs. A stag drinking at a stream, the water reflecting the trees. An owl looking out from a tree, its eyes glowing in moonlight. A doe with her fawn, the mother protecting the child, gently licking her forehead. A bird carrying food in its mouth, a fox running through snow. "This is my hunt," he said. "This is what I collect. Not meat, not trophies, not death, but moments. Proof that life is beautiful if you don't disturb it. And the most important lesson? The most important lesson is that you don't have to kill to be a hunter. The best hunter is the one who sees everything and destroys nothing." He fell asleep, and his face was peaceful, like someone who understands what matters. The old hunting journal lay on his lap, open, and I could see the new pages. Pages filled not with death entries, but with love, with gratitude, with observations about the beauty of life. And I thought of the stag the man had seen. And I thought of hunters without guns all over the world who see, love, and kill nothing. The train went on through the night, and every animal, I believe, was safer because this man had given away his gun. And not only that, this man was safer too. His soul was freed. His heart was light. And I drifted away into forests where no shot falls, where animals and humans live together in understanding, where a hunter learns that love is stronger than killing. And sleep comes gently, without guilt, warm, relieved, redeemed. And the stag, he sleeps too, safe, because someone loved him instead of killing him. The woman sat across from me on the train from Waren to Neubrandenburg, through Mecklenburg, over flat fields that looked endless as the sea. She was old, with eyes like a hunter's, attentive, hungry for detail, searching. Her hands weren't still. They moved constantly, pointing to something outside the window I couldn't see. She wore binoculars on her forehead, and her pockets were full of notebooks, full of pencils, full of measuring tools. She smelled of earth and rain. "Traces," she said, as if she could read my mind. "Everything is a trace, not just footprints, no. A trace is when the grass is bent, when the earth is a slightly different color, when the birds flee in a particular pattern. Nature, it writes everything down. You just have to know how to read. I've spent 60 years learning how to read. 60 years from morning to night out in the fields, in any weather, every day." She told me about her life. All her life she walked through the fields of Mecklenburg, reading what happened there. "This field," she pointed out the window. "3 hares passed by here this morning. I can see it in the grasshoppers they startled, and in the direction the insects flee. It's a story written on the ground." She pulled a magnifying glass from her jacket. Not the modern kind, no, it was an old glass with a brass setting and wooden handle, probably already 100 years old. "With this," she said, "I started when I was younger. With this you can see what normal eyes miss, the fine scratches in the grass that don't come from rain but from claws, the color changes in the earth that show where water flows, where chemistry shifts. The spiderwebs hanging between the grasses, they're like ropes that tell a story. You just have to know how to read." She held the glass to the sun and looked through it, her eyes behind the glass magnified like a magician's. "My husband," she said thoughtfully, "he never understood. He thought I was mad, going out every day in the rain, staring at the earth every day as if I were searching for gold. But it's not gold I was looking for. It's something more valuable. It's history. The history not written in books, the history that happens every day beneath our feet and that no one sees except me. Perhaps you too, if you learn.
People, they only see what's above. The sky, the sun, the birds. But the most important story is below, in the grasses, in the earth, in the world that lies beneath human feet. That's where the truth is. That's where life really lives. She showed me her notebooks, pages and pages full of sketches, notes, observations. And as she showed me, I realized her notebooks weren't just notes, but poetry. Each sketch was a poem, each description was a song. She hadn't just documented the traces, she had loved them, tended them, made them sacred. Look, that's a trace from a doe from this morning, perhaps 2 hours ago. And there, that's where an eagle landed and flew again with a small creature in its claw. And here, those are raindrops from yesterday's rain, and you can see that the wind was coming from the west. That's poetry, it's reading life itself. She flipped through several pages, and I saw the care she put into her notes. Some were simple sketches, a stag, a bird, a field mouse, but others were detailed, with descriptions, with dates, with measurements. This one here, she pointed to a particularly beautiful sketch. That was 15 years ago. A family of wolves passed through here. It was the first time in 100 years that wolves had come to this area. The farmers, they were frightened. But me, I wasn't frightened. I was delighted. I followed the traces every day for a week. I wanted to understand where they went, how long they stayed, what they needed. And in the end, I wasn't frightened anymore. I was in love with their eyes, which I never saw, but whose eyes I saw in the traces. The depth of the footprints, that was their strength. The regularity of their paths, that was their intelligence. The way they used the fields, that was their patience. And all of that, it spoke to me. The wolf spoke to me through its traces every day. My life, she said, it wasn't lived in houses. It was lived in fields. But it wasn't empty. It was full of history, full of drama, full of life. Every day was a new book, a new mystery to solve. Why this trace? What's happening here? Who was here and why? That's as interesting as the best novel. And also, I was never lonely. The fields, they're never empty. They're full of voices, full of life, full of presence. You don't need people around you when you have such company from nature. The fields are my family. The traces are my friends. The train traveled through the landscape, and she kept looking out, reading the traces, reading the story, reading the world. Her eyes moved quickly, left to right, up and down, as if she were really reading a book, the book of Earth. You see, she said, without taking her eyes away. People, they think nature is silent and unchanging. But that's not right. Every day, every hour, something happens. There's drama, joy, sorrow, birth and death. And it's all written on the ground, in the traces. I've seen drama worse than any film. I've seen love. 2 deer with horns tangled. A minute, 2 minutes. And then they freed themselves, and both were alive. Can you imagine what luck that is? That life didn't separate them? In a few years, she said, these fields perhaps won't exist anymore. Perhaps they'll be built on. Perhaps they'll be lost. And then this story will be forgotten. But me, I've written it down. I've preserved it. I've captured the trace forever. These notebooks, she lifted them gently as if they were made of glass. These are my life. That's what I'll leave behind. Not money, not a house, but the truth of the fields. The truth that life is wonderful if you just look. And perhaps one day my children or grandchildren will find these notebooks, and they'll understand that grandmother wasn't mad. They'll understand that the fields are alive, that the traces speak, that the earth has something very important to tell us, if we just listen. She fell asleep, her notebooks in her lap, and I thought of the fields, of the 1,000 traces that go unnoticed, of the stories written in the earth, of the woman who spent decades of her life reading and preserving these stories. Her magnifying glass fell from her hand, rolled slightly forward, and I caught it. It was heavier than I expected, as if I were holding the weight of her life, the weight of all her years in the fields, the weight of every trace she'd ever read. The train traveled over the flat land, and every blade of grass, every trace, every secret was carried forward into the night, into the past, into memory.
And slowly I drift away into the fields, where the grass speaks, where each trace tells a story, where life writes its paths, and everything is a book. History, truth, silence, warm. In the magnifying glass, it lies on my heart, heavy as the truth. I met the tree keeper on the train from Annaberg to Zwickau through the Ore Mountains, where winters are harsh and trees learn to survive. He was old, perhaps 90, and his hands trembled slightly. But his eyes were clear, blue as forest lakes. He wore a thick brown coat that smelled of forest, of wood, of decades spent beneath trees. On his lap sat an old box made of wood, handcrafted, with ornate carvings, tree motifs, acorns, leaves. When he noticed me looking, he opened it slowly. Inside were tools, small chisels, fine scissors, brushes of natural fibers, all old, polished by many years of use. "These are my instruments," he said, not looking at me. "Like a surgeon has his instruments, I have these. With these things, I have gone into the wood." "I am the tree keeper," he said, without greeting me. "It's a profession that doesn't exist anymore. There are no more tree keepers. But once I was one. I went through the forests and I knew every tree. Not all of them, no. But the great ones, the old ones, those with history. I knew them all." He paused and looked out the window where the Ore Mountains landscape rushed past, dark forests, dense and stern. "A tree keeper," he continued, "is not simply a forester. A forester manages the timber. A tree keeper, they tend the trees themselves, like a doctor tends a patient, with attention, with love, with the understanding that each tree is an individual with its own needs, its own problems." He described his life with a kind of piety I've only seen in priests. But this priest was a priest of the tree, not the church. When a tree fell ill, I came. I cut the dead branches, I cleaned its wounds, I helped the tree to breathe. When a tree grew too large and another lay beneath it, I helped. I taught the trees to live together. "This tree here, in the Ore Mountains." He pointed to the window where an ancient, gnarled spruce stood. "I saved that tree 60 years ago. It was damaged in a storm. A big branch was broken off, and it was bleeding, you might say. And I went, and I healed it. With my hands, my knowledge, my love. And see, the tree is still here now, still alive, still knowing that I saved it." The man told me in great detail how to heal a tree. It's not enough to clean and seal the wound. You must choose the right time, only when the sap is flowing, when the tree is growing actively. You must use the right materials, special salves you make from beeswax and resins coming from the trees themselves, and you must do it with your whole heart. "If you're angry," he said, "if you're in a hurry, the tree will feel it, and the wound won't heal. The feeling is important. The tree trusts only those who respect it." Some people say that's mad. A tree can't know you've healed it. A tree can't feel, can't be grateful. But I say that's ignorance. The tree knows more than you. The tree knows its own body. The tree feels. When you lay your hand on a tree with love, with intention, the tree knows it. Then the tree understands that you're a friend. The work of a tree keeper, it wasn't just about saving trees. It was also about teaching people. I took school classes into the forest and I showed them how to read a tree, how to read the story in the bark, in the rings, in the branches. A tree is a history book if you know how to read it. A particular moment came when he showed me a core sample, a thin piece of wood he'd removed from an old tree. With the eyes of an experienced reader, you could see the growth rings, hundreds of them, each one thin or thick according to the year it represented. See this thick ring here? He pointed to a particularly broad stripe. That was a good year. Lots of rain, warm sun, ideal conditions. And see, the next year is suddenly thin. That was a cold, dry summer. And then again, the tree recovered. Hope came back. It was like reading an autobiography written in wood. Sorrow and joy, drought and plenty, all recorded in the structure of the tree itself. He leaned his head back. I'm too old now to go into the forest. My legs aren't strong anymore. But my heart still wanders through the forests. And I know the trees are waiting for me, waiting until I return. Or perhaps they know I won't return, and perhaps they're sad. But perhaps they also understand that a tree keeper needs time to rest too. What moved me most was the way this old man spoke of the trees as if they were his children. He told me about individual spruces and firs he'd known for decades, their names, their characters, their crises and triumphs. The spruce there, up by the meadow, she's stubborn. She never wanted to grow in the right direction. I had to support her with fine sticks to keep her straight. But now she's beautiful, straight and strong. She trusts me. And then, the pine down in the valley, she's gentle. She grows quietly, without protest. When I need something from her, a branch to cut, some material, she gives it to me without resistance. She understands that I want what's best for her. He also spoke of modern times, when fewer people understand what a tree keeper does, or why. The scientists, he said, they tell me that's impossible. A tree has no consciousness. It can't know you're there. It can't be grateful. And the old man laughed gently. But I've seen how trees respond when you treat them lovingly. They grow faster, they're healthier, they resist disease better. That's science, the science of love. The old science that modern people have forgotten. Before we approached the end, I asked him, "Do you have regrets? Did you regret dedicating your life to these forests?" And his answer was brief and absolute. No, never. The forest was my teacher, my friend, my family. And I stood in its life as a student and servant. That's a life of meaning. That's a life that counts. He fell asleep, his head resting against the window, and I saw how his face became so peaceful, as if he were dreaming of forests, of 1,000 trees he'd healed, that he'd known, that had known him. The train rattled on through the Ore Mountains between the ancient spruces, and every tree, I believe, knew that this man was passing by, their friend, their healer, their warden. And I drift away into dreams of forests, where ancient trees speak, where a man with golden, experienced hands heals, where each branch tells a story, each piece of bark reveals a life, and everything is connected, bark and breath and love and years. The ancient knowledge, older than human language, quiet, warm, eternal. The trees still wait for a tree keeper who comes and heals and listens. I met the beekeeper from the Spessart on the line from Würzburg to Gemünden on a summer morning when the sun was already hot early on. The window was open and you could smell the forest, oak trees, damp earth, and, yes, honey too somehow. The man had a box of honey jars beside him, glinting in the morning light like small windows into a warm world. 50 years, he said, his voice as gentle as honey itself. I've been tending bees in the Spessart, in a forest older than any language. These oak forests, they carry history in their roots, and the bees build on that. They make their combs from this history. He held up a jar of honey. That's not just honey. That's the color of the forest in summer, its scent, the light, life itself. He described his life with great tenderness, how he'd go out into the forest each morning to his hives and listen. You must listen, he said. You must learn the voice of the bees. Each colony has its own voice. This colony here, it's wild, quick, stressed. It always wants more flowers, more pollen. And that colony there, it's quiet, patient, wise. It works slowly, but with purpose. The bees teach me patience, he said. I cannot rush. I cannot say, work faster. That doesn't work. The bee has its own rhythm, and that rhythm is older than all human clocks. A good beekeeper, they must learn to follow this rhythm. They must make themselves small and let the bees be large, not the other way round. I watched him regard the honey jars lovingly, as if they were sacred relics. He opened one carefully and let me smell it. The scent was heady, like a summer day compressed into a single breath. It was the color of the forest itself turned liquid. The man explained, each honey is a moment. This batch here, that's June, when the chestnut trees were flowering and the weather was warm and clear. A few hundred meters further on, you can see how the blooms shifted, how the bees moved their sources. Honey is like a calendar if you know how to read it. He showed me a photograph from his pocket, a swarm of bees against the sun, thousands of them all together, a living body. That, he said, that's my family. Not the individual bees, no, the whole colony together. When one dies, it's like grief. But life goes on. The colony is immortal. One queen dies, a new one is born. The bees are immortal. The honey I make, he said, it has history. It has time. It has the labor of millions of bees. When I take a spoonful of honey into my mouth, I'm taking the summers, the forests, the oak trees, the light, sorrow, and joy, all together. That's not just sugar. That's meditation. That's prayer. He also told me about the strangers who sometimes came to the forest to meet the beekeeper. People from the cities who wanted to see his bees, taste his honey, understand how to live with animals in this way. And he received them all with an open hand. They come from a world of haste and hustle, he said. They see in me that there's another way, that a human life can also be stillness, waiting, listening. Sometimes they come again. Sometimes they start their own colonies near their homes. That gladdens me. That means the teaching continues. Outside, we traveled through the forest, Spessart, these oak forests that look eternal. The man looked out like someone seeing home. When I die here, he said, I want my ashes to flow into the forest. Not a cemetery, no. Into the forest, beside my bees, beside my oak trees. That's where I belong. That's where I'm at home. There I'll become part of the honey, forever. I asked him then how much longer he'd work, how much longer his body would follow him. His answer was simple. As long as the bees need me, as long as there are flowers. A beekeeper is never too old to work. Age means nothing, if love still burns hot. He told me about his grandson who comes out from the city every weekend to be with the bees. The grandson doesn't quite understand yet what it means, but he'll learn. The mountains, the forests, the bees, they teach impatiently but thoroughly. Time is on their side. The man also spoke of difficult times. Cold springs when the flowers didn't come, when the colonies grew weak. In these times, he said, you must help them. Give honey from healthy colonies, give warmth. Sometimes you save a colony, sometimes it fails beneath your hands. That's the cycle. The bees understand that I do what I can, and the forest forgives too, if you do it with your heart. He showed me an old photograph too, yellowed and frayed at the edges. It was the beekeeper as a young man, perhaps 20 years old, with a long beard and bright eyes. He stood beside a bee stand in the sun, and you could see the white painted beehives in a row like little houses. That was 1962, he said. Back then with different methods, without modern frames. But the bees were the same. Equally industrious, equally wise, equally wonderful. His voice grew even quieter. I've worked for 50 years with the same souls, just in different bodies. That's a great honor. What I won't forget was the way he spoke of the forest, not as a resource, not as a possession, but as a relative. An older brother, perhaps, who protects you if you show respect. The oak trees there were probably 100 years old or older. The beekeeper knew their personal histories. That oak there, it had been damaged by lightning 30 years ago, and the beekeeper helped it heal. That other oak, it had been felled once, but the roots grew back, and now it was stronger than ever. The forest, he said, the forest doesn't forget. The forest forgives. If you work in love, the forest works with you in return. It's like a contract, really. I'm here, I help, and the bees give me their honey. The forest gives me flowers, the oak trees give me shade and protection. Everything is connected. He soon fell asleep, the jar of honey still in his hand. And I thought of the forests of the Spessart, the oak trees, the millions of bees singing and working and dancing their little dances to show the direction to the flowering forest. The train rattled, ta-dum, ta-dum. But the beekeeper's home wasn't in the train. Home was in the forest, in the honey, in the bees, in the immortality of life that renews itself. And slowly, my thoughts drift away into the forests, between the oak trees, where it smells of honey and history, and the bees dance and show me where I must go. Slowly, surely, home, where I've always been. I met the innkeeper from Helgoland in the line from Bremen to Cuxhaven on a winter's day when the air smelled of salt and damp. Outside the window, the sky was gray, leaden, and the sea, when you could see it, was dark blue and churning. The man across from me was old, with eyes the color of tarnished silver, like coins from another century. 30 winters, he said without preamble. I've been watching guests in my inn on Helgoland for 30 winters. I don't work in summer. No, the summer tourists, they're all the same. They want photographs, souvenirs, fish and chips. But in winter, whoever comes has come because they need something. The island is empty in winter. Almost nobody comes. The summer visitors have gone off to Italy, Spain, warm places, easy places. But I stay, and every winter 1 or 2 guests arrive. Mad folk, people with dreams and wounds, people who need solitude, people who need the sea the way other people need medicine. He described the island to me in winter with great care, with the voice of someone who's told this story 1,000 times, but lives it anew each time. The storms that sweep across the low houses, the house itself vibrating like something alive, the windows rattling as if weeping, the sea wind that blows through everything, walls, doors, hearts. "It's not beautiful," he said. "It's not romantic. It's wild. It's brutal. The sea in winter, it will knock you flat if you're not careful. It tries to drink the island, tries to swallow you whole. And if you're frightened, you disappear or you die. But if you're not frightened, if you just sit and watch the sea, then something happens. But that's precisely why," he went on, "that's precisely why these people come. They come because they want to be alone, because they need solitude. They come because the city, Hamburg, Bremen, Berlin, Munich, all the big cities, they break you. The lights are too bright, the voices are too loud, people are too close, and they think, perhaps loneliness on an island will heal me. Perhaps there, far away from everything, I can find myself again." He laughed quietly, but not unkindly. It was a laugh that understood, that recognized, that hoped. And sometimes it works. I've had guests arrive bitter, full of rage, full of poison, full of hopelessness, and after a week alone with the wind, alone with the sea, alone with themselves, they leave as new people, with something in their eyes I can't explain, but that I recognize. "There's one guest," he said, "a man who comes every winter for 15 years now, always the same week, the week before Christmas. Always the same room, upstairs with a view of the sea. And every time he comes, he just sits by the window and watches the sea. He speaks to no one, not to me, not to my wife, not to the other guests. He barely eats, just some bread, some tea. I thought the first few times that he was suicidal, to be honest, that he'd come to end his life. But then, after a week, he goes back to his life, back to Hamburg, to his work, to his family. And I know he survives another year because he knows, for 1 week in winter when the island is empty and the storms are screaming, he can be alone with the sea again, can breathe again." "My wife," he said, "she's asked me for years, why do you stay? Why don't you leave this island? Why don't you just call a taxi, pack a suitcase and go? There are warmer places, better business, a life with people instead of the screaming wind." And I tell her, that's why. The screaming of the wind. That's why. It's not suffering. It's home. He leaned his head back and smiled. It's what I know. It's where I belong. Helgoland. That's my life. He described the seasons on the island with the precision that only comes from someone who spent their whole life in one place, who knows the subtle shifts that others miss. Winter is wild and loud, I've said that already, but spring comes quietly, on a day when, if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. Suddenly the birds are there, seabirds coming back from the south, nesting in the cliffs, screaming the sky with their calls. And the island wakes up. The house no longer vibrates with wind, but with life. The sea changes color, not to blue, but to something alive, a kind of turquoise that glints in the sun. And then, in summer, the tourists come, and he retreats mentally, shuts himself away inside the inn, waiting for the horde to pass. Autumn is his favorite season. Autumn, when the nights grow long, when loneliness returns, when the island belongs to him again. And the guests who come in winter, they're not ordinary tourists. They're pilgrims, I'd say. People making a final journey. People who've lost themselves. People who've loved everything and lost everything. People too tired for life, but not yet ready for death. And the island, this wretched, cold, wet island, the sea that tries to eat the island a little more each day, it speaks to them. It says, "You're small. Your pain is very great, but there's something greater still. The sea is greater. The storm is greater. Nature is greater. And perhaps you can go on living with that knowledge. Perhaps you can be with your pain without being destroyed by it." The train passed the harbor buildings, and I could see the sea, gray, endless, infinite, like a great melancholy. The man looked out like someone looking at home, someone seeing where they belong. "The guests," he said, "they always thank me when they leave. They embrace me, sometimes they cry. They say, 'You saved my life, you healed me.' And I always say, 'No, not me. It was the island, it was the sea, it was the solitude. I only built a house, a roof, a warm room, where they can sit while the sea is listening, while the sea licks their wound.'" "I'm growing old," he said, before his head fell to the side. "But the island won't grow old. The sea won't grow old. And when I go, in a few years, I hope not, but perhaps, someone else will take over the inn. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the inn will die too. But the island, the sea, the solitude, they'll remain. They'll always remain." He soon fell asleep, his head resting against the window. His hand lay in his lap, and his face looked peaceful, content, like someone who has lived their life, who has accepted it. And I thought of that small island at the far north of the German coast, where an old man, gray and wise as the sea itself, receives guests like a priest receiving pilgrims, where the sea speaks in its wild language and people who need solitude listen, where solitude is not tragic but sacred, necessary, healing. And the train went on, ta-dum, ta-dum. But I was still on the island, in the storm, with the guests who find the sea, who seek the sea, who need the sea. And the wind howls outside on the island, and the windows rattle like hearts. And I sit warm, here in the train, on the rails, while the sea outside sings its songs, its dark, cold, beautiful, necessary songs of healing. And my eyes grow heavy, and sleep comes, slowly, surely, like the tide that comes and goes, again and again, again and again, ebb and flood, like life itself. The old woman sat across from me, laying shells on the table slowly, one by one. We were on a train from Vlissingen to Middelburg through Zeeland, that flat, salty landscape of the Dutch coast. The train ran along the dikes, and you could see the sea everywhere, gray, eternal, boundless. The woman was perhaps 80 years old, and her hands didn't tremble as she laid out the shells. 40 years, she said, without any introduction. I've been taking this train for 40 years, and every time we pass here by the dike where the tide comes and goes, I stop and gather shells. This line has windows on both sides, and when the tide goes out, the shells are there. They lie on the mud, thousands of them, all different colors, all different sizes. She showed me the shells she'd gathered that day. Pink and white striped ones, dark brown, cream-colored with lines like old maps. Tiny, translucent ones, smooth and rough. A whole natural history in her hands. This small one, she said, it's beige and has an edge that looks like a blade, exactly like a knife. I first found one like this 30 years ago on a very hot summer day. And today I found the same one again on a cold autumn day. Or no, perhaps it's the great-granddaughter of that same shell, I don't know. but it's the same. I can feel it.
I didn't really understand how she could say it was the same shell, that shells have great-grandchildren. I see it in the lines, she explained to me patiently, as if I were a child. Each shell has its own pattern, like a fingerprint. Each one has written its own story in the lines, in the curves. Look at this one carefully. Those are old scars. That's where it was damaged, perhaps by a storm, perhaps by a predator. And after that, it kept growing, layer on layer. The scar never went away, but the shell, it learned to live with it, just like people do.
She told me about her life by that dike. Not on the dike itself, she wasn't foolish enough for that, but close enough to go every week when the tide went out. My husband, she said, he died when I was still young, too young, and I didn't know how to carry on. But then I came one day to this beach, to the shells, and I understood. Shells don't need another shell to live. They live alone, and they're still whole. I have a collection, she said. Thousands of shells. My whole house is full of them, on every shelf, in every room, and each shell I remember where I found it, which autumn, which season, what the weather was like. Those are my memories, you see. Those are the moments of my life, all stored in the shells. My son thinks I'm mad, she laughed. He says they're just shells, but I tell him, no, they're stories. They're time. They're loneliness and travel and waiting and patience. They're everything that matters. She held up a particularly large shell with deep furrows. I found this on the day my son was born. I was stressed, I was happy, I was terrified. And I went to the beach and I found this shell, this big, strong shell. And I knew everything would be all right. The train moved on, away from the sea, into the town of Middelburg. The woman packed her shells slowly, one by one, as if performing a delicate, sacred ritual. She had a small bag, cotton, with a drawstring, and she placed each shell inside as if it were a treasure. Every time, she said, when I take this train, I find new shells. And every time I'm surprised. Every time as if for the first time. I think in the morning, perhaps I'll find nothing today, but then the tide has gone out, and the beach is full of them, full of life, full of stories that no one knows except me. She told me then about her work, about a house full of shelves, full of boxes where shells are catalogued by type, by year, by season, by the weather on the day they were found. She has thousands, perhaps more. She can't count them. She stopped counting long ago. But each shell has a label, a small piece of paper with a story written on it. Not the scientific story, she's not interested in that, but the emotional story. The story of her heart on the day she found it. Whether she was sad, whether she was hopeful, whether she was lonely, whether she was happy, which is rare but does happen. And the shell becomes the carrier of that emotion, becomes the mirror of her soul on that specific day, in that specific hour, in that specific moment when her fingers pulled the shell from the mud. She told me that one day, when she's gone, and she speaks of it calmly, without fear, with the acceptance of someone who has lived their life, who is ready to let go, someone will find these shells. Perhaps her son, perhaps a granddaughter, perhaps a stranger who buys the house. And that person will be confused. What are all these shells? Why are they so carefully kept? Why these labels? And then, and this is the beautiful part, this is the hope, they'll begin to read. They'll read the story of a life. They'll understand that an old woman, alone with her sorrows and her hopes, went to this beach every week and gathered shells and wrote a chronicle of her own soul. And perhaps they'll cry. Perhaps they'll understand that love isn't always loud, that devotion isn't always dramatic, that a life that others might think ordinary is full of beauty and depth and meaning.
"I believe," she said, "that the shells are waiting for me. Every time they wait until I come, and then they show themselves. Perhaps that's mad, but I believe it. All my life I've hoped for the wrong things. For a man, for money, for recognition. But the shells, they've given me everything I needed. The shells are enough. I am enough." She showed me the place on her wrist where there was a thin scar, almost invisible. Just a thin white line, so old that she herself sometimes forgot it was there. But she told me that this scar was from 45 years ago, a day when she didn't think she could carry on, a day when the silence was too loud and the loneliness too heavy. She was young, not as young as she is now old, but young enough to believe the pain would last forever. And then she came to this beach, and she found the first shell, a pink one, small, perfect. And in that shell, she saw something that said, "There is still beauty. There is still reason to look." And since that moment, she's been gathering. Since that moment, the collection has kept her alive. Not in some grand way, not dramatically, just a woman alone with shells every week, every season. That's all she needed. That's all she needs. She soon fell asleep, her hands resting quietly in her lap, the bag of shells on her lap. The train moved on, and I looked out at the flat land, the dikes, the sky, and I thought of the shells, how they simply lie there between water and land, ebb and flood, awake and sleeping. They don't wait impatiently. They're simply there. They're trusting. And sometimes an old woman comes and takes them, and they become part of a story, a memory that lasts hundreds of years. And slowly, so slowly, my own thoughts drift away too, like the tide, out into the sea, where shells grow and acquire new scars, and remain whole nonetheless. And everything is salt water and light, and patience, and deep, deep rest. I met the crab fisher on the line from Bremerhaven to Cuxhaven one autumn morning just as it was getting light. The train was moving slowly. This coastal line was never in a hurry, and through the window I could see the North German harbor landscape, cranes, water, and everywhere that salt and fish smell that clings to the coast. The man across from me was dark brown from salt water, his hands like ship's rope, solid, knotted, strong. 4 o'clock in the morning, he said without any preamble. That's when it starts. The alarm goes, and it's still pitch dark outside. Cold. So cold the windows are frozen over. Autumn's the worst. The waves, 5 meters high sometimes. The water's bitter cold, and you can barely feel your fingers. Your heart's hammering when you go into that water. Your body's saying, "No, this is mad." But your mind's saying, "Yes, this is living." He rubbed his hands together as if to show me they were still alive, still warm, despite all those years in cold water. But that's precisely then. That's when everything's black and bitter, when the whole world wants to sleep. That's when I know the crabs are awake. They come alive in that hour. They don't know why, and neither do I, but I trust them. He described his working life to me as if he were telling a story only a sleep-teller could tell. I take my boat out. She's called Margaret, named after my wife, and the first traps are already in the water, have been for hours. They're hung on lines, perhaps 100 meters down, sometimes more, and I haul them up, one after another, with these old hands of mine that have done it 1,000,000 times over. I pull, and the rope gets heavier, heavier.
and then the cage breaks the surface, soaking wet, covered in seaweed. In there, the crabs are teeming. Hundreds, sometimes thousands. They're trying to escape, their claws snapping. But there's no way out. And I sort them. The big ones, I can sell those, perhaps €5 or €6 a kilo. The little ones, I throw them back so they can grow. It's a strange responsibility, you see. I'm the one decides who lives and who goes back into the sea. Some people reckon that's barbaric, he went on. But crabs, they're selfish creatures. They don't care about the others. They'd eat their own sisters if they could. That's their law. And my law is, I take only what's big enough, and I give back what's too small. It's a kind of respect, you see. Respect for their world. The man was old, probably in his 70s, but his eyes lit up when he spoke of the sea. 60 years, he said. I've been going out for 60 years. 60 autumns, 60 winters, 60 summers. And every time I set out, I'm uncertain. I'm just as uncertain now as I was on the first day. I don't know if the crabs will be there. Sometimes the catch is meager, sometimes it's good. I don't know if the weather will hold. The sky lies to me every time. I don't know if my boat will make it. Margaret's very old now, older than me. He laughed quietly, but it was a genuine laugh from deep in his belly. And that right there, that's what makes it worth doing. That's what keeps it alive. If I knew what was coming, I wouldn't go at all. Life needs surprises. The animal world under the water, he said. It's like a big village. Everyone knows everyone. The fish flee when I come because they recognize my boat. They've learned the sound of Margaret, and they know the fisherman's coming. But I'm not interested in fish. Crabs are my business. The gulls follow behind me because they know I'll make offal. I throw the tiny crabs back, sometimes a fish too if I can't sell it. And the gulls wait. They know the time I go out. And the crabs, they know I'm coming somehow. I know that sounds daft, but I swear it's true. They hide deeper when my boat gets near. It's as if they've learned my voice. The train wound its way between the harbor buildings. The man looked out at the water, which was turning gray-green in the morning light. This journey, he said, I don't often take the train these days, but today I had to. My son's had a grandchild born today, a grandson, and I'm going to meet him to show him the sea, to tell him where I've spent my life, where Margaret and I spent all our years, where the crabs live and the fish and the gulls and all the invisible things that have their own lives under the water. I wanted to take my son out on the boat, he said, but he wouldn't go. Says it's too dangerous, too uncertain. He's afraid of the unknown. But his son, maybe he'll understand when he's old enough. Maybe the crabs will call to him when he's grown up, just like they called to me. My son, he wants nothing to do with it, he laughed. He works in an office in the city. He sits under fluorescent lights and stares at a screen. He says the sea's too dangerous, too hard work, too poor. But I know he's wrong. The sea's poor in money, that's true, but rich in, how should I put it? Rich in truth. Rich in being, not in having. You can't lie out on the sea. You can't pretend to understand if you don't. The sea knows no lies, no illusions, no timidity. My grandson's first job. It won't be crabs, he said. He'll be a school teacher, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or something else with security and a regular wage. But when he's grown, when life's tired him out, when he's sitting in his office and doesn't know who he is anymore, then he'll come to me. And if I'm still here, Lord, grant me a few more years. Then I'll take him out on the boat. We'll go before dawn in autumn when the wind's at its strongest, and I'll show him where the crabs live. And then he'll understand who he really is." The train slowed as we drew near Cuxhaven. The crab fisher leaned his head back. "The rhythm of the sea," he whispered. "That's the true rhythm. Not ta-dum, like the train, but breathing, breathing, breathing. Ebb, flood, ebb, flood. Slow, deep, true." The train slowed more. We were nearing Cuxhaven. The man soon fell asleep, his head against the window, a gentle smile playing on his lips. And I sat still, hearing the train. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And beneath it, if I listened carefully enough, I could hear the sea, its breath, its vast, quiet breath. The crabs crawling in their traps and waiting, the fish fleeing and hiding, the gulls crying and hoping. All of it still there, behind the train, behind the man, behind his words. And I could hear it if I was still, if I truly listened. And my eyes are growing heavy, very heavy. And I'm drifting with the crab fisher down into green, cold water, into a life I've never lived, but somehow know, because everyone carries the sea inside them, and everything's slow and true and full of life that knows itself and knows me. The sound of grass rustling over the dune, that brought her back to me. I was sitting in the train, heading north toward Emden, and out there the autumn wind was moving across the salt marshes. Peculiar sound, that rustling, like breathing, like something alive and waiting. And it carried me back to a woman I'd met many years ago on that very line, on an afternoon much like this one. She was standing alone on the platform, and I could see straight away that she wasn't waiting to board a train. She'd just arrived, small travel bag in hand, and she was looking round like someone seeing a place for the first time, though I'd have wagered she knew it well. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying for a good while. A woman about my age, perhaps late 60s, with graying hair that the wind was mussing up. She wore a dark blue coat that fluttered about her, and she had a way of standing that caught my eye at once. Not stiff, not huddled, but the way a person stands when they're here, but wish they weren't. It was the bearing of someone who's having to steel herself. I followed her. Not deliberately, mind, but my feet just seemed to go in her direction. She left the platform, up a small path toward the dune, and I kept a respectful distance. It was as though her steps had some draw to them, something in me I couldn't quite name. Perhaps I recognized something in the way she walked, the weight she was carrying. Perhaps I saw in her someone I'd known, or someone I might have become. She climbed up to the dune crest, and there she stopped. The wind was really getting up. Autumn had fairly arrived, and there were hardly any visitors left on this stretch of beach. It was a gray sort of day, one of those where the sky and the earth are nearly the same color, and there's no clear horizon anymore. Everything goes soft, blurred, and somehow everything feels both possible and impossible all at once. She stood in all that haziness as if she'd finally come home. She stood with her back to the sea, looking out across the flat country beyond the dune. The houses, the trees, the world of people carrying on. And just then I saw her hands clench into fists. She wasn't peaceful, not a bit. She was in pain, but not the sort that makes a noise. It was a quiet pain, deep pain, the kind that shows in your shoulders, in the way you're breathing. She stood there for ages, minutes, perhaps a quarter of an hour. The wind was tugging at her coat, her hair was flying about in her face, but she didn't stir. She was so present, so completely in that moment, that I barely dared breathe loudly. I could see her mouth moving, not really moving, but it seemed as though she was murmuring something important, something only the wind ought to hear. Her lips were shaping words, slowly, with care. Words I couldn't make out, but the sorrow behind them was clear as the autumn sun sinking over the horizon. And she raised her hand. Slowly, she lifted it, as if she were waving to someone. But there was no one there, only the empty beach below the dune, the empty marshes, the sky hanging gray and open above it all, like a promise that never gets kept. Her hand stayed up there, trembling a bit, perhaps from the cold, perhaps from something else. And then, very slowly, she let it drop. She'd said what needed saying, the place had heard her. And that's when I understood. The rustling of the grass. That was her words, the ones she couldn't speak aloud. Words for someone who wasn't there anymore. She was standing on that dune, saying goodbye to someone this place had known. Perhaps a husband, perhaps a child. Perhaps a whole life lived here on this beach, in this autumn, in this memory. The autumn wind carried her words away, spread them across the sea, and she seemed to know that. She seemed to understand that the sea is a good vessel for words, for memories, for grief that's too heavy to carry alone. The sea is big enough for all our sorrow. This dune was their place, his place, their place together. I could see that now. She wasn't arriving here for the first time, no. She'd been here many times, and each time she came back, asking the sea whether it still carried his memory, whether the dune still remembered him. And each time nature answered quietly, yes. Yes, we carry him. Yes, he was here. She turned around and made her way back to the station, slowly, unhurried, but not hesitating either. It was the walk of someone who's done what she came to do. Her task wasn't to heal the grief. No, grief like that never fully heals. But to name it. To tell it to this place, this dune, this beach, this wind. She passed by me without seeing me. I was invisible to her grieving, only there to witness that she wasn't entirely alone, even though she felt it. And now she could go back to her life, perhaps a touch lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because it wasn't only hers anymore. The place had taken it. The dune, the sea, the wind. They'd all heard her words. I never saw her again after that day. But that night, on the train back, I sat by the window and understood something I'd not grasped before. The place isn't what heals the grief, but it receives it. The dune received her sorrow, the sea took her words, the wind carried them away. And sometimes that's all we need, someone or something that says, yes, I see you. Yes, I'll carry your words with me. I wondered where she was now. Still living? Had she found real peace eventually? True peace? Not just the fragile quiet of that one moment on the dune. I don't know. But I do know she'll go back. People like her always go back. They go in the autumn, when the wind's at its wildest, and they speak to the sea like an old friend who knows everything, understands everything, and asks nothing of you. The sea's a patient listener. It takes it all in. Now, years on, when I hear the grass rustling over the dune, when the autumn wind blows and this train runs across the salt marshes, I see her again. Not sorrowful anymore, but at peace. She's standing there with her hand raised, speaking things only the wind should hear. She's saying names, dates, last words. She's saying, I'm still here. I miss you. Forgive me if it took me too long. and the wind carries it all away across the sea into the endless. And I sit here in this warm compartment, feeling the rhythm of the train beneath me. Ta-dum, ta-dum. And sleep comes slowly, gently, and it feels like forgiveness. The autumn outside turns gray. The fields blur away, and I think of all the people standing in all the places in the world saying goodbye. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, with a raised hand, and I'm drifting slowly, slowly into a dream where autumn wind and memory are the same thing, where the dune waits and the sea listens, warm, held safe, silent.